to start by inviting everyone to remember the last time you were stressed. Was your heart beating fast? Were your hands jittery? Did you take a deep breath, go out for a run, a walk, or go to the gym? You might have said yes to some of these, because we are not strangers to the idea that our body is connected to our mind. When we feel something in our mind, it's manifested in the body. And when we do something to the body, like going out for a run, we can also change the way we feel in our minds. So today I want to talk to you about how our body sends us messages about our emotions and why we should read them. I also want to focus on cultural differences in this, focusing on the Asian American community. So I first started becoming curious in this topic in high school when I had mysterious backaches. So for context, like Derek said, I grew up in Beijing, China, and came to America when I was 16. And my first year here was really alienating because all my friends and parents were still in Beijing. And my current predominantly white American suburban high school didn't know how to support me, even though they really tried. And that's when I started feeling these backaches for no reason. Every week, I met with a mental health counselor from my high school as a part of the international student support policy. And every week, he would ask me the same question: how do you feel? That's such a hard question. I guess I could have told him about the emotional alienation I was feeling, but I didn't have the words for it. It was the first time I ever felt alienated or an outsider anywhere in my world. So I didn't tell him that. What I also didn't tell him was my backaches, because I thought, how would that be relevant for a mental health context? I didn't get clarity on the backaches until I went back to Beijing that summer. I went to a hospital to get a CT scan of my spine because I was convinced something was wrong with my spine. The doctor was looking at my CT scan, really examining it, and he looked confused. He said, "Your spine looks completely fine, but how do you feel emotionally?" The same question. And I was so puzzled by that question because why is a doctor treating my spine asking about my emotional health? And I was pondering that question for months until I realized that what he meant was that my backaches was speaking to me. It was the emotional alienation in my mind manifesting itself into physical pain. But then I had another question after this. How come when the Chinese doctor was treating my physical health, he was asking about my mental health? But the American counselor, when he was treating my mental health, he didn't ask anything about the body. Is it the American counselor's oversight, or is there a cultural difference in the way people conceptualized how the body manifests emotional distress? So in a follow-up study, I try to answer that question. Since last summer, I've been researching this question. With my advisor, Dr. Yulia Chensova-Dutton at Georgetown University, we found initial evidence for cultural differences in the way people experience physical sensations during emotions. We had people watch this really sad movie clip about a girl losing her dad, and we had them rate how intensely did they feel sadness during the film, as well as a list of physical sensations like heart palpitations, shaky knees, or feeling heavy, sensations typical for emotional experiences. But this leads to another question. Are people aware that these physical sensations are a sign of emotions? Because it's one thing to feel physical sensations. It's a total other thing to know that these sensations are linked to emotions. For me, I knew I had backaches, but I didn't know my backaches were speaking to me about my emotional alienation. We can think about this difference as getting an email versus reading an email. We get emails all the time, maybe way too much. And we know that when we get an email, we don't have to do any work. We just let it happen, let a notification pop up on the top of our screen. But when we read an email, that takes work, that takes time. We need to understand what the email is trying to say to us. Is it to schedule a meeting, to be invited to a wedding, or is it 20% off on Uber Eats? For me, I got an email in terms of backaches, but I didn't read it because I didn't try to interpret what it means behind it. So in a follow-up question, with Dr. Yulia Chensilva-Dutton and Dr. Shuwen Wang here at Haverford. We asked people explicitly how much do they listen for emotional information from their bodies. Because it's kind of like reading an email from your body. Let's just call it body reading from now on. And a sample question for body reading would be, how much do you listen for emotion information from your body? We can take a second to think how you would rate this statement from 1 to 7. And in addition to body reading, we also measure people's mental health by screening for depression symptoms. So the fewer depression symptoms a person has, the better their mental health. We're concerned about mental health because we think it should be relevant for body reading. The more we're able to read the emotional content behind a physical sensation, the more we're in tune with our emotions, and the better we're able to address the emotional issue. It's like we can first read the email and then actually answer the email. And because we're also interested in cultural differences, we recruited 3 groups. The first group is 126 college students born and raised in Hong Kong. The second group is 88 white American students born and raised in the US, mostly from Georgetown University and partly from Haverford College. And the third group are Asian Americans. We have 67 second-generation East Asian Americans, meaning that they would have at least one parent who immigrated to the US from an East Asian country. And they're mostly from Haverford, Bryn Mawr, and Swarthmore College. I want to give a special thank you to the Asian affinity groups at these colleges for making the study happen, because they did so much heavy lifting for recruiting and participating in the study. So let's talk results. What I found on the mental health piece was that I found support that when people read physical sensations more, they have better mental health. And this could go in 2 different directions. Maybe that when people are reading their physical sensations for emotional information, they are literally happier because they understand their emotions more and they can solve these issues with someone else's help. For me, I was finally able to talk to my mental health counselor about my feelings after I realized that I had feelings from my backaches. And the other direction is also possible. Maybe when people are having better mental health, happier people are more able to listen to their bodies. We can imagine maybe when someone is struggling with mental health issues or feeling really stressed. It's tiring to have those problems, and we don't have all the additional energy to do the additional work of reading our bodies. Let's remember the last time you were stressed again. Were you annoyed at getting new emails more than usual? And did you let them sit in your inbox a little bit too long before you started reading them? I see some nods, so I'm sure you get it. And on the cultural side, I found cultural differences in the way people experience physical sensations and reading them. I was expecting to find a neat spectrum from Hong Kongers to white Americans, with Hong Kongers at the top, Asian Americans in the middle, and white Americans on the bottom. This is because the cultural traditions in East Asia highlights the role of the body in emotional experiences. It's really interesting because in traditional Chinese medicine, it says that internal organs are linked to emotions. And in the seminal medicinal text called Huangdi Neijing, it says that the liver is in charge of anger, and anger damages the liver. And if you want more contemporary studies, it's found that when couples are describing intense emotional conflicts with each other, Asian American couples would use more descriptors about their body, like pain, ache, or I can't sleep, whereas white American couples use fewer physical descriptors. But my expectation of a clear spectrum wasn't really totally supported. It was partially supported because Hong Kongers are at the top for body reading. This supports that there is more emphasis in East Asian cultures for listening to bodies. But what was surprising was data from Asian Americans. They're actually lower on body reading than the other 2 groups. So instead of a line, we have a V shape with Asian Americans on the bottom. They're lower than Hong Kongers. That part makes sense because They didn't grow up in East Asia, so they have less immersion to the body-focused culture of East Asia. But what doesn't make sense is that they're also lower than white Americans. How is that so? Shouldn't they have parents who can pass down the body reading to their children? This makes me think that there must be additional factors here at play that break the perfect linear spectrum that I was expecting. And this is making me think of the psychology of second-generation Asian Americans, as well as my own psychology a lot differently. I used to think of myself as a blend of two cultures, one of my home East Asia culture and one of the current mainstream American culture. So this should put me on a perfect middle point on all cultural variables between the two sides. But the results is showing me that it's not that clear. Cultural differences are not on a clear linear spectrum. In fact, when we immigrate from one country to another, our psychology doesn't have the same destination as our physical location. When we traverse through cultures, we're creating new cultures of our own. And for second-generation Asian Americans specifically, their unique culture passed beyond what their parents can pass down to them. For them, they have the unique experience of living with the generational story of immigration, as well as being a racial minority in America. And all of this can make life more anxiety-inducing for them compared to their white American counterparts or Hong Konger counterparts, who don't share the same experience of dealing with the fact that they are a racial minority in their world. And this heightened anxiety in Asian American communities can actually be associated with being less in tune with their bodies. So this can be a reason for why Asian Americans broke the mode of the clear spectrum and actually have the lowest body reading. So from my research, I learned two valuable lessons. The first lesson I expected to find, that reading your body is helpful for mental health. Because when we understand the emotional information behind our bodies, we can be more able to address emotional issues with someone else's help. It can be better to verbalize it and make us happier. But the second lesson is one I did not expect to find. It actually changed the way I think about culture. Yes, I found that East Asian cultures do tend to emphasize the body's role in emotions. But this trend for second-generation Asian Americans, this trend is from their parents' homeland culture, so a generation away. This trend is completely erased for second-generation Asian Americans by their own generation's experience of living in America as a racial minority. So even something as private and subconscious as the way we treat our bodies is also determined by socio-political factors when we think socio-political factors shouldn't really encroach on the private sphere. So let's imagine a participant from my study, a Hong Kong participant, is visiting Haverford, and they meet me and a white American student. It's only natural for them to assume that I am more similar to them than a white American student. And this could be true on so many levels. We have the same food preferences, and we speak the same language at home. But it's also not true on many things, like body reading. This is an example that our culture is not just determined by what happened in the past, by where we came from in the past, by where our parents came from in the past, but it's also determined by the here and now, by our current experiences in the social world. So I hope what we can all take away from this is that sometimes we're quick to judge people by where they come from, by their accents, by the way they look. And then we can quickly characterize them into people like me and people not like me categories. But today, I want to invite everyone, as well as myself, to talk to someone who are in your people not like me category and find one shared common experience between you two. Maybe there are friendships waiting to happen. And maybe we're a little bit less alone in our world. Thank you.